Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking a look at a low profile cooler from Thermalright. This is their classic SI-100. Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we'll be taking a look at the Thermalright Classic SI-100, which is a low profile HTPC cooler and is actually an extremely good price at the moment here on amazon.co.uk. Links will be in the video description. Now this video isn't sponsored or affiliated with Thermalright in any way, shape or form, but I do find that their coolers at the moment do prove to be extremely good value for money and actually perform pretty well. Come with some excellent fittings, which we'll be checking out later. So yeah, at the moment, highly recommended, but we need to check this out to see what it's actually like. So we're going to go through, do the unboxing process, we'll do an AM4 installation guide, then we'll do some benchmarking and come back at the end of the video with my final thoughts. So if you want to find out more, check out the chapters in the video description. So let's start off first of all with the unboxing process. So as you can see, this comes in a very basic packaging. So it says cooler. So you've got the classic logo on there, low profile CPU cooler SI-100. This actually does come in a couple of different varieties. This is the base classic version, which is the kind of chrome and black. There is a blackout version, and also there are versions available, I believe, with RGB coolers, etc. So potentially there might be something which is more interesting to you. This is the basic entry-level version. It does have support for LGA 1700, the latest and greatest from Intel. Also backwards compatible with LGA 1200, the 115X range, and also some of the 2000 range as well. I'll put some links in the video description as well so you can see exactly what CPUs it fits. Also, it has been updated recently, so it now fits AM4 and AM5. So if you're looking to do a smaller AM5 build, this might be just up your street. I'm actually going to be doing a mini ITX AM4 build in the coming days or weeks. So I wanted to get this cooler in ready because this is going to be absolutely perfect for the small chassis that I'm going to be using. So some of the key features on there, so a multi-fan configuration. So because this is a downdraft cooler, so effectively the fan is on the top blowing down through the grills in the actual heatsink and down towards your CPU and also your VRMs and that sort of area. So there's going to be those obvious advantages, especially for those smaller form factor cases. So you've got a little bit more downdraft going around the VRMs to keep those nice and cool, which will help with thermals and potentially with boost speeds. It does come with a standard fan, which is non-RGB, but it does have an RPM of up to 2000 RPM, plus or minus 10%, and they do include some thermal paste in here as well, so if you're concerned that maybe you don't have thermal paste on hand, it does come with a tube of TF7. In terms of the specifications and sizing, I'll show you those on the screen, so pause that now if you want to check those out in more detail. Essentially, just the cooler itself, you're looking at 75mm high, give or take, 74.8 I believe it says exactly. If you add on a fan on top of there, if you add on the one that's included, 25mm, so that's going to take you up to basically 100mm in height, hence why it's the classic SI-100. That's basically how tall it is. If you don't have 100mm clearance and you do want a little bit less, you can actually attach a 15mm fan on top of here, which is going to give you that extra 10mm of room, so taking you down to 90mm, should that be of interest to you. On the other end, we've got the specs for the fan itself, so I'll give you a quick close-up of that so you can take a look at that. I think that's pretty much it, so let's get on and see what we actually get. So starting off, you get your installation guide, which, as per usual with Thermalright, pretty decent stuff, all in black and white, which is a little bit of a shame because some of the fittings are actually coloured, but it's pretty straightforward and it's all labelled up, so it shouldn't be a problem there at all. Next up, on the top, we have the included fan. So this is the TLE12 fan. This is a PWM fan, nice motor on there. Actually, it's quite a decent motor. I'm going to say that's a 4-pole motor on there. I'm not entirely sure. I'm not going to take it apart, but it seems like a pretty quality item. You've got rubber dampeners on all 4 corners on both sides as well to absorb vibrations, which is going to be really important because if you are planning on using this in a small form factor PC, there's a very strong chance that that PC potentially will be right next to you on a desk or is going to be in some sort of media center setup. So keeping things nice and cool and limiting vibrations is very, very important. The fan itself's got a nice braided cable on there with a 4-pin PWM connection, so no issues there, and obviously no RGB connections because this is just a standard fan. Next up, we've got the cooler itself, and it's a quite an unusual thing to see in the world of 120mm and 140mm tower coolers. This is a little bit of a break from tradition, but this is why it's so good, because it fits in a small form factor, but effectively it is kind of like a 120mm tower cooler, just with it bent on a 90-degree angle using those 6mm heat pipes. So 6 heat pipes on there going into a solid cooling area there. This is really good as well because they are actually enclosed in there, so you don't have to worry about any of them not being soldered in correctly or loose, etc. And the base of it, although protected by a little bit of plastic there, is really nice, really well machined and very, very smooth. So you shouldn't have any issues at all with mounting pressure and all that kind of stuff. You'll also notice that on the bottom there is actually a support bracket there, which potentially you might want to put a little piece of rubber in. This is something which potentially, if there is vibration, it could possibly touch on that and make a little bit of noise, but we'll see how it goes in testing. The mounting mechanism is actually very cool on this as well. Some of the things we find with the noctual low profile coolers is the actual assembly is an absolute pain. You have to screw the screws in from the back, screw in from the back of the motherboard into the cooler. It's very, very tricky. Whereas this, they've overcome that by basically cutting out two small sections there. So you've got direct access with a screwdriver straight in through and to tighten up the two screws for mounting. So this should be very easy to install, but we'll find out a little bit later. Something I should have mentioned a little bit earlier in the video is the actual rating for this in terms of TDP. So Thermalright themselves have actually given a rating of around about 240 watts as their TDP. As we know, TDPs are really, really hard to kind of fathom out between the different brands, etc., and how they work out. And obviously you've got boost speeds, etc., which bump up the wattage, and also you've got undervolting, overclocking. So potentially, even if you buy a kind of 105 watt part, chances are it's going to boost up to about 150. So obviously do take that into consideration. We're actually going to be using this today with a Ryzen 9 3900, which is a 12-core, 24-thread processor, which is effectively, I believe it's either a 95 or 105 watt part, but generally boosts up to about 140, 145 watts. So this should be well within the realms of what this can cope with, or at least hopefully. So that's the cooler and the fan out of the way. Let's take a look at the accessories box. So nice accessories box, and obviously it says what it is. There is a warning about sharp edges on here, which is a little bit concerning, but we'll see how we get on. So I've got all the accessories now laid out on the table so we can have a quick look through what we actually get. So we've got one bag here. So this is additional mounting hardware. So these are spacers for LGA 1700, color-coded blue, and also there is the 115X and LGA 1200. So these are your Intel setups. Those are color-coded black as well, so also labelled up, so you shouldn't go too far wrong there. Next up, we've got the main screw set. So we've got our AM4, which is in their traditional kind of pinky red colour with the 4 screws. And underneath that, you've got the section there, which is for the Intel 2000 series. A lot more mounting hardware. It's a little bit of a dying platform now, so we won't go into that too much detail, although we will be doing a full install with AM4 shortly. Talking of AM4, so this is our bracketry bag, and also there is some thermal paste in here. So they do include a small tube of the TF7 compound, which is actually supposed to be pretty good, although in testing today we'll be using MX4 as that is what we generally use, and that makes it a little bit easier to compare like with like. In the bracketry bag we do have 2 AM4 stroke AM5 brackets, so that is your AMD ones, clearly labelled up so you know what they are. And also for the Intel side of things, we've got the Intel brackets. Again, this is going to be suitable for the LGA 115X, LGA 1200 and LGA 1700 sockets, so yeah, no issues there. If you are using a Intel setup, because obviously Intel boards don't generally have a backplate as such, so they do include this nicely anodized backplate, so you don't need to put any protective coatings on there, no plastics, stickers, etc., because it is anodized so that it's not electrically conductive. And it's a nice thick metal as well, so that's really good to see. And last of all, we get our wire clips for attaching the fan. So if you're using the standard one, which is included, which I'm guessing most of you probably will do, so these are the clips for 25mm thick fans, but they do also include a separate set. So if you do decide you want to go for a low profile fan, then they include some clips for a 15mm width fan, or depth I should say, although obviously there isn't a fan included, but if you do choose to buy one separately, then you can use these clips to attach it. So I think that's pretty much it for the unboxing. Let's get on and install this sucker and see what it's like. Okay, so let's start off with the AM4 installation of the Thermalright SI-100 cooler. So this is an AM4 motherboard. The process is going to be pretty much identical for AM5. Obviously you will just have a slightly different settings here, but the mounting brackets are going to be exactly the same. So we want to remove the 4 screws here, and remove these 2 brackets. We will be leaving the AM4 or AM5 standard backplate in position. Obviously with AM5 it doesn't come off anyway, but with the AM4 one it does have a tendency to drop away. So ideally you want to try and do this if you possibly can on a nice flat surface like we've got here. or just make sure you've got someone with you or some means of actually holding the AM4 backplate in place whilst you loosen off the screws. So with the screws removed, you can remove the plastic AM4 brackets also. Next up, we're going to install the pinky red standoffs, and there's 4 of them, so 1 over each one of the protrusions coming from the AM4 backplate or AM5 backplate, whichever system you're using. If they don't fit on quite well, you can turn them up the other way and they should fit a little bit better. Just make sure that they're in nicely. There we go. So now we can attach the brackets to the top. So these are the AM4 brackets, and these will attach to the top like so, with the kind of the angle facing inward. So you can rest both of the brackets on the top, then get the other 4 screws which are included in that segment of the bag. Just drop those down through the hole, and if you want to, you can get the threads started by hand just to make sure they tighten up and aren't cross-threaded. Of course, if you're using a screwdriver, you can just use the reverse threading method. So just screw backwards until it clicks, and then you can fully tighten them down. So we're going to go ahead now and fully tighten them down, or pretty much most of the way. I would suggest with this, like with CPU coolers in general, if you do opposing sides, and that way you'll find that your AM4 backplate will be in the right position and won't have uneven pressure on it. And just keep on going until the screws reach a hard stop. Okay, so that is that part done. So now we can apply some thermal paste. I'm going to be installing MX4 from Arctic just for testing purposes, because that is what we generally use. So don't want to add any extra variables to our testing. You can just add a blob, like a grain of rice size on there. If you want to, you can use a spreader. I will be using a spreader because that is what we do for all of our testing. So just to keep things all the same, but you install your thermal paste however you see fit. So now we're ready to actually attach the cooler itself. So very important, don't forget to remove the plastic film from the bottom of the CPU cooler. And what we want to do is to have the overhang section, this bit here, going over your VRM. So if I turn the board around, so we're looking at something like this. Now obviously if you want to, you can mount it around the other way. There's no reason why you shouldn't. You should still get excellent RAM clearance, so use whichever way works for you. If you've got a particularly large VRM cooler section here, then you may need to actually rotate it around, but ideally, if you can, try and get it around this way. Now the easiest way of doing this is to kind of match up the holes from the actual screws with the mountings, and then just kind of just drop it on, and it should pretty much fit. Again, checking clearance against this section here. We are very close on here, but it isn't touching, so that is absolutely fine. So now with the cooler in place, I'll give you the overhead shot. So these holes here are for actually tightening up the screw threads. So just pop your screwdriver through and match up with the screw. Do a couple of turns anti-clockwise, so you hear that click, and then 1, 2, 3, just do 3 turns and that will get it started. And then we'll do exactly the same on the other side, so anti-clockwise, there's that little click, there it is again, and now we can do 1, 2, 3 turns. So now all we're going to do is to do exactly the same on both sides until the screws reach a hard stop. So now we can attach the fan, which is going to be pretty easy to do. So you probably want to work out where your fan headers are. For us here, the fan headers are on this side. So if you get your cable and kind of get it roughly in the right position, although do bear in mind that obviously the spring connectors are going to be there. So for this instance, because that is potentially going to be blocked by a spring, I'm actually going to go ahead and rotate it around 90 degrees. Now in terms of actual fan mounting on the top, you can space it out in various ways, so depending on the room you can kind of slide it around there. I'm going to try and get it as reasonably centralized as possible, and you may find, depending on the speed of the fan, there may be a little bit of whistling noise in certain instances depending on where you've actually got it mounted. Anyway, let's attach the spring clips to the side. This installation method with it led down is going to be a lot easier because the spring clips are naturally going to try and fall to the side. So let's give you a side on angle now and you can see how we put some tension into the spring. So now you can see the cooler is fully attached. So if we spin it around to the side slightly, and we'll look at the spring clips there. So these are the spring clips, and all you want to do is just to apply a little bit of light pressure with your thumb and push it into place until both sides are locked in. Spin it around and then basically do exactly the same thing. And there we go. That is pretty much it as far as the installation is concerned. You can spin the fan blades just to make sure that they're free and not catching on anything, although in this instance they shouldn't be anyway. So now we can actually attach the fan header. So the fan header, very simple to do. On this particular board the fan headers are in the top, so this is our CPU, and there's the AIO there. So what we're going to do is to plug in the PWM header onto the pins there. And then you can obviously cable manage the rest of it, tuck it out of the way so it's not obstructing anything. And we've got some excellent clearance there for the RAM, as you can see. So the RAM is going to be no issues whatsoever, so even the tallest of RAM, because there's no overhang whatsoever. And also we have got some pretty reasonable clearance there for the rest of the stuff, including the VRM, so you can pretty much get a finger in there almost. So yeah, pretty decent, and yeah, I think it looks pretty good. This is going to look great in our little mini ITX system when we finally get it built. So that's that done. Let's get on and do some thermal testing and we'll come back with the results. Okay, so the testing's been done, and I've got to say I'm slightly, well, I'm not upset. This is a £24 cooler, but it hasn't performed quite as well as I'd have expected. And in terms of noise profile, at 2000 RPM it is very loud. Now at the moment idling, the graphics card is considerably louder. So if I put my hand on the graphics card fan, you see the noise profile changes altogether, and it's effectively silent. I can hear the PC behind me more than I can hear this fan. So if you're going to be someone who's putting this in a media center, it's going to be relatively low TDP, you're going to be absolutely fine. If you are going to be one of those people which is going to maybe set this up in some sort of rendering station, then potentially things might be a little bit more different. And actually I'm going to turn the PC off now just so I don't have to hold the fan. And there you go, that is much better. I can actually not be annoyed by this fan. I don't know why I used it. I should go for a passive cooled GPU for testing, but anyway, regardless. So overall, in terms of performance, the low temperatures basically pretty much identical to the Thermalright Assassin which we reviewed the other day, which was the Assassin King SE-120. If you want to check that out, you can do from the links below. In terms of the lowest recorded temperatures, we're looking at somewhere around about 33.8 degrees, I believe it was, whereas the King was getting somewhere about 1 degree less, so kind of within spitting distance. I initially was considering redoing my thermal paste application. I did take the cooler off just to make sure that there was good coverage across the entire face of the cold plate, and you'll see from some of the footage, took it off, looks like it's had absolutely fantastic coverage on there, so that wasn't the issue. The issue was when we were driving our Ryzen 9 3900 on all core loads, especially sustained ones, that is when we saw temperatures starting to run away a little bit and heading towards 80 degrees Celsius. Whereas with our traditional 120mm tower coolers, again, such as the Thermalright King, the temperatures were a little bit lower, about 5 degrees lower. So in terms of if you're using this for a, like I said, a rendering station, you can be rendering for a long time. This was running for about 5 to 10 minutes on a Cinebench load, which is a really unrealistic load anyway. So we could have tried things such as undervolting, that sort of thing, but realistically we wanted to give this as a completely base installation, so comparing like with like. And ambient temperature wise, we're looking at about 24 degrees, and with just a single run of Cinebench, we're looking at about 74, 75 degrees as the maximum temperature. So we're looking about, well, in terms of idle temperatures, about 10 degrees over ambient, so we're about 34, 35. And yeah, when we take a jump up over that, so we're looking at about 50 degrees over ambient for the highest recorded temperatures. But in terms of idling, very good, very quiet. The fan seems to do a very good job. And obviously it's low profile. You can see we've got a regular PCI Express graphics card here. and it's only just slightly taller than it. So if you are in a case where you are pretty cramped on space and you can just about fit a GPU in, then you should be okay with this. Personally, I would say that the TDP rating on the box is misleading. 241 watt processor on here, it's going to be hitting thermal max easily. I have tried it also. You're probably wondering why this is here. Actually, I have actually tried with a Noctua fan. So this is from, I think it's the NHU12S or 12U CPU cooler from Noctua. So I've just took the fan off here, attached it to this cooler just to see if there's any difference, see if it was the fan which is causing the issues or whether it's the actual heatsink. And actually the temperatures got worse. So the fan itself, in terms of its abilities, is actually arguably better than the Noctua, although it is louder. This only goes up to 1400 RPM. This goes to 2000, but the Noctua was getting a couple of degrees hotter, albeit quieter. So potentially, if you do want to set up your rig and have it quieter, but you're happy to sacrifice a few degrees in temperature, the actual increase in temperature didn't actually negatively affect the actual performance. We actually scored more points in Cinebench by about 10 to 20 points. It's a very fractional thing, but certainly the scores were higher as the temperatures rose a little bit. So it isn't as bad as it actually sounds. High temperatures generally are something which scare people off, and potentially with an AM5 setup on here, or maybe a 13th gen setup, especially the ones which get quite hot quite quick, you may find the fan ramping. So I think for your £24 of money, it's probably going to be more suited to things like the 5600G, the 5600X, maybe a slightly older 3700, those kinds of things, and maybe the lower end Intel processors, the 10400, 11400, 12400, that sort of thing. So anyway, I think that's going to wrap things up. Overall, again, for £24, we've got to take some kind of step backwards and think this is actually really good performance for the money. And obviously, in terms of smaller form factor coolers, there isn't a great deal to choose from. If you spend double, you can get something like the Noctua NH9, I think it is, which doesn't perform as well because there isn't as much thermal mass. So again, it's going to be down to your case, the sizes, and also the airflow in the case, which is going to aid with it all. Anyway, I'm wittering on now, so I'm going to wrap this up. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. And don't forget, if you want to see more content like this on a daily basis, hit subscribe and the chime notification, and you'll be notified of future video releases. But for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.